合作论坛成果落实协调人部长级会议在湖南长沙举行。习近平主席向会议致贺信，宣布
China trades nearly $300 billion a year with Africa, more than 4 times the US-Africa trade. After slashing all tariffs on African goods, that number...
There are announcements, and then there are global shifts. When China said it would remove all tariffs on exports from 53 African countries, it wasn't just opening a trade route, it was throwing open the gates to the world's second-largest economy, redefining what's possible for a continent that's long been boxed out of global value chains. This new zero-tariff policy is more than paperwork. It's a power move, one that could tilt the global balance of trade, elevate Africa's manufacturing elite, and challenge the economic dominance of traditional Western partners. Let's break down how this historic shift started and where it might take us. The announcement that changed everything. It was mid-June 2025. In Changsha, during the China-Africa Economic and Trade Expo, top Chinese officials met with African foreign ministers to revisit the promises made at the 9th Forum on China-Africa Cooperation held the previous September. That summit in Beijing's Great Hall of the People saw leaders like President Xi Jinping and President Denis Sassou Nguesso of the Republic of the Congo reaffirm their growing alliance. But this time, China's announcement stunned even seasoned diplomats. The country declared it would remove all tariffs on exports from every African state it holds diplomatic ties with, a total of 53 countries. That means goods from these nations can now flow into China's $17 trillion economy without facing a single cent in customs duty. This policy isn't just for the poorest countries. Until recently, China had granted duty and quota-free access to least developed countries, which includes around 33 African nations. But now, this new approach includes middle-income economic powerhouses like Kenya, Nigeria, Egypt, South Africa, and Morocco nations that are already building sophisticated manufacturing and high-value product industries. Why China is doing this now? At first glance, this could look like a bold act of generosity. But peel back the layers, and the strategy is razor-sharp. China is betting big on its long-term relationship with Africa. This is about shared industrial growth, deeper political alignment, and a clear pivot away from traditional Western alliances. It's also about creating supply chain alternatives that sidestep geopolitical tensions with the United States and the EU. By removing tariffs, China gains preferential access to Africa's resources, markets, and political goodwill, while giving African manufacturers, exporters, and investors direct access to nearly 1.4 billion Chinese consumers. According to Hannah Ryder, founder of the consultancy Development Reimagined, this policy shift could be transformative. It enables middle-income countries like South Africa and Kenya to now enter the Chinese market duty-free, she explained. But Ryder also warned, unless Africa ramps up its export capacity, trade deficits will continue to grow. In 2024 alone, China had a $62 billion trade surplus with Africa. So yes, the doors are open. But walking through them will require more than celebration. 360 billion yuan and the return of big deal diplomacy. This zero-tariff policy isn't coming out of nowhere. It follows China's return to big-ticket funding across Africa, with a massive $50 billion investment package pledged during the 2024 FOCAC summit. That funding spread over 3 years includes credit lines, infrastructure support, and new energy projects. After a brief pause during the pandemic, China is now doubling down. And with this financial injection comes a strategy. Help African nations build value-added industries that don't just ship raw materials to China, but create locally manufactured goods that can compete globally. If Africa can pull this off, we're looking at a new industrial age on the continent. Inside CAETE 2025, you could feel the shift at the China-Africa Economic and Trade Expo held from June 12th to 15th, 2025 in Changsha. This wasn't just another international fair. It was a curated display of African ambition, where exporters pitched everything from organic cosmetics and teas to luxury wines and fresh flowers. One of the standout delegations came from South Africa's Western Cape, guided by Wesgro, the province's trade, tourism, and investment agency. They weren't just there to shake hands, they were there to win buyers. China is a key trading partner for the Western Cape, said Wesgro CEO Renel Stander, noting that in 2024 alone, exports from the province to China hit $635 million. If we are to triple our provincial exports by 2035, growth in new markets is essential. Wesgro's approach isn't just local, it's global. The agency is actively pursuing markets in ASEAN, Brazil, India, and the Middle East, all while building cross-border partnerships that strengthen access to elite buyers. And this isn't just talk. On the expo floor, deals were being made. African brands were building visibility, locking in contracts, and getting face time with decision makers from some of China's largest state-owned enterprises and consumer goods chains. Strategic alliances are driving growth. Behind the scenes, one name kept surfacing: Standard Bank Group. As Africa's largest lender by assets, they're not just watching the shift, they're engineering it. Andrew Robertson, who leads business enablement and operations at Standard Bank's commercial banking division, believes China's new policy is a catalytic opportunity, but one that requires serious infrastructure to unlock. Through strategic platforms and our partnerships with entities like Wesgro, we support businesses in converting policy into progress, Robertson said. Standard Bank is investing in digital trade systems, sector-specific guidance, and cross-border financial tools that help African exporters reach the Chinese market and manage the scale that comes with it. Because, make no mistake, entering China at this level means you have to scale production, manage logistics, ensure compliance, and match global quality standards. It's not charity, it's business at the highest level, leveling the playing field. Still, China knows that not every African country is ready to seize these opportunities equally. That's why it has pledged additional support for the poorest African countries, such as Mali and Tanzania nations that may struggle to compete with more developed peers like Egypt or Morocco. These extra measures include training programs, marketing assistance, and promotion strategies specifically tailored to small and medium-sized exporters in LDCs. It's an effort to level the field and prevent these economies from being steamrolled once tariff barriers are gone. In practical terms, this means China wants to help African LDCs build product pipelines, strengthen supply chains, and improve branding so they can truly benefit from open access, not just be dominated by it. From dump trucks to teas, we've seen how the policy works, but let's talk numbers. At Yantai Port in Shandong Province, China's largest hub for Africa-bound shipments, something extraordinary happened. On July 7, 2025, the port loaded a record number of goods, including dump trucks and industrial equipment, for export to over 20 African nations. In just the first half of 2025, the China-Africa liner service out of Yantai transported 2.858 million tons of goods, marking an 80.7% year-on-year increase. That's not just growth, it's a supply chain revolution. China's exports to Africa now include machine tools, textile machinery, and other industrial-grade equipment critical for African factories to move up the value chain. In fact, China's overall trade with Africa during that same 6-month period hit $165 billion, a 14.4% increase year-on-year. And last year, the full trade volume between China and Africa hit an unprecedented $290 billion. The United States takes a different path. While China is expanding trade ties and removing tariffs for African partners, the United States is moving in the opposite direction. In early July 2025, US President Donald Trump announced a 30% tariff on South African goods and produce, effective August 1, 2025. It's a move that's shaken South Africa's economy, raising deep concern across government, industry, and agriculture. The announcement landed like a punch. While the administration didn't officially withdraw from the African Growth and Opportunity Act, the new tariff effectively sidelines it. AGOA has long given duty-free access to the US for over 6,000 South African products, including cars, textiles, fruit, and wine. With those advantages now in question, thousands of businesses stand at risk. John Steenhuisen, leader of South Africa's opposition Democratic Alliance, called the move deeply concerning, warning of massive job losses, especially in sectors like farming, mining, and manufacturing. He described it as a crippling blow to a country already struggling with one of the world's highest unemployment rates. And the numbers don't lie. Billions of dollars in potential export earnings could now be lost. For a nation like South Africa, where trade plays a central role in the economy, that's not just a policy change, it's a full-blown crisis. Why the tariff matters so much? President Trump's broader tariff strategy is part of his push to reduce America's trade deficit, and smaller countries, especially those in Africa and the Caribbean, have become the unexpected targets. Trump stated publicly that he's planning to impose a general tariff of a little over 10% on imports from at least 100 smaller economies. According to Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick, these nations typically have low trade volumes with the U.S., which makes them politically low-risk targets. But politically safe doesn't mean economically harmless. These new rates are among the highest in recent U.S. history, with many echoing the tariffs first introduced on April 2, 2025. The markets reacted sharply back then, and they're doing it again now. Trump has even hinted at similar tariffs on pharmaceutical drugs and computer chips, giving companies 1 year to relocate manufacturing to the U.S. before imposing higher penalties. That's part of a broader America First agenda aimed at bringing jobs back home, but at a cost to global trade partners. Earlier this year, Trump finalized a preferential trade deal with Indonesia, reducing tariffs to 19% and granting full U.S. market access to American companies. That's good news for U.S. exports, but signals to African nations that they're not the current priority in Washington's trade playbook. South Africa's uncertain road ahead. In the wake of Trump's announcement, South Africa is scrambling to respond. The brief extension of AGOA now set to expire on August 1st has left a tiny window for renegotiation. But with the U.S. presidential elections approaching and Trump doubling down on his policies, hopes are slim for a major reversal. Steenhuisen and other leaders are calling for urgent domestic reforms, not just in trade, but across infrastructure, governance, and power generation. They argue that South Africa must now focus on market diversification and economic modernization to protect itself from future shocks. That includes attracting private investment in electricity and freight rail, upgrading ports for faster exports, tackling corruption in municipalities, and restoring confidence in property rights and economic equity policies. South Africa's Minister of Agriculture also voiced support for ramping up trade talks with new partners. "We must expand access to new markets for our produce," he said, underscoring how critical it is to build resilience in a volatile trade world. China versus the U.S., two very different offers. The contrast couldn't be starker. On one side, China is offering zero tariffs, industrial partnerships, and market access for everything from spices and teas to minerals and textiles. On the other, the U.S. is erecting barriers, even for longtime trade partners. That's not to say either approach is right or wrong, it's simply reflective of two very different strategies. The U.S. is focused inward, prioritizing domestic manufacturing and trade deficits. China is focused outward, investing in global partnerships and long-term economic influence. For African countries caught in the middle, the message is clear: diversify your alliances, strengthen your export sectors, and be ready to adapt fast. What comes next? There's a quiet urgency in all of this. On one side, China is opening its gates. On the other, the United States is closing ranks. The opportunity is real, but the window may not stay open forever. African nations must now choose how to navigate between rising tariffs and new incentives. The countries that adapt the fastest, invest the smartest, and scale the quickest will define the next chapter of Africa's economic rise. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Will China's open-door policy lead to a manufacturing boom? Will U.S. tariffs force Africa to pivot even further east? And which African industries do you think are best positioned to win in this new era? The rules have changed, the trade winds are shifting, and now we see who knows how to sail.